I'd like to tell you a little bit about John from his son's perspective. John just celebrated his 89th birthday, and his son wrote this tribute to his father. Dad is not physically imposing, but the shadow he casts over his friends and their friends looms as large as the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. Dad's voice is not impressively deep or strong, but if you listen to him, you'll suddenly find he's talking about you, how you feel, and that he cares for you. Dad's not known as a leader, yet if we follow his lead, we'd be debt-free. We'd be helping others. We'd be self-reliant. We'd be happy. Dad had no formal education after high school, yet he is artistic, very artistic. Works with his hands, has built and rebuilt homes and cars, has invented and finagled as required in life. Though some consider his philosophy unsophisticated, he is morally committed to Jesus Christ and tithes with his actions and his wealth. He is committed to American exceptionalism, enough to put his life on the line when required. He's extremely devoted to those he loves. Going the extra mile, 1,000 miles, for my mom with her Alzheimer's was not a choice by him as much as a natural outpouring of that devotion. His affection to all of us, to friends, family, even down to his great-grandchildren, is as natural to him as breathing, and likely he wouldn't even understand why we would think it unusual. If you're attracted to Hollywood star qualities, or one who shares advice with every word, or one who impresses in his clothes, or the car he drives, or the important people he knows, you will not be impressed with my dad. If you occasionally need a hand up, a smile to cheer you, a reliable friend, an ear to bend, an inspiration or a breath of the holy on earth, then my dad is your man, and I hope I grow up to be just like him. And he has 4 children that would echo all those sentiments, that love their dad with all their heart, and they're all great kids. Great kids, my age were kids. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce John Roberts.
Thank you, Roman. It is really a joy for me to be here. Too many times I have been asked, and yet it took me over 30 years to even talk about the war. Many, many times I just said, well, that's just something that occurred, and I was part of it, and I don't want to talk about it. But it really then began to sink in. My daughter-in-law is here today, sitting over here. And I were talking one day, and she's at the dinner table, and they said, I want you to tell us a story about what you did. I said, well, I don't really want to talk about it. She said, well, yeah, but you're going to have to do it someday. So I started telling the stories, and I realized that the people were more interested in what really did take place. So that's what it become. I even wrote a book to her suggestion. It's called The Homesick Angel. Now, the Homesick Angel was the first plane that we left and went overseas in. I'm getting ahead of myself here. When I first realized that there was a Christian nation in which I lived in, and I wanted to be a part of that, I was 5 years old. By the time that I was up to 12 years old, then that's when I gave my heart to the Lord. And from that time to this, it has been a joy to serve Him and to serve everyone that I've come in contact with. A friend of mine and I decided we would go to the draft board and find out how much of a deferment we had left. Come to find out that we had gone to school with the girl that was in charge of the draft board. And we got to asking her, well, is there any chance that we could find out how much time we had left? And she said, well, I'll look it up. So she looked it up. And both Danny Messenger is the one that was with me. And I waited, and she got the cards out. She says, well, each one of you have a year's deferment. No problem. We got to talking to her, and she was shuffling these cards back and forth. Oh, and she says, I better put these back. She put them back all right. She put them back in the active file, and 2 weeks later, we were both drafted. He went into the Marines. He became a Marine, was injured and came home. I went to San Pedro. There was an army base there. And while I was at the base, it was raining cats and dogs. Boy, it was really raining down hard. And an orderly came up to me and he said, there's a cavalry captain that wants to see you. And I said, what do you mean a cavalry captain? I didn't even know we had cavalry captains in the U.S. Army in the regular army that I was in. So he said, well, get ready and get yourself all shaved up and ready to meet this cavalry captain. So I did. Went to his door, knocked 3 times, stood at attention. He opened it up and saluted me. And I saluted him back. He said, soldier, come on in. And I said, sir, what am I doing here? I don't know you or anything about it. He says, I looked at your file, and he says, you're an engineer and did drafting for Douglas Aircraft. And I said, that's correct. He says, well, I have a drawing. And he picked that drawing up out of his pocket, and he had it in and out of his pocket several times because it was all crumpled up and everything. And I looked at it, and he says, can you draw that and enlarge this so I can get a better look at it? And I said, well, yeah, I think so. It could have only taken me 1 day, but I learned the Army way fast. I spent 3 days on that one drawing. Terrible. But after I got it done, he was so satisfied with the drawing. Now, it was a mortar that had a steel base on it, and it was so you could move it about. But it also had an azimuth ring and an elevation scale on it that I had added to this mortar. And I didn't find out until several years ago that it was actually manufactured. And this cavalry captain was able to get it on the market. And the Army and the Marines used it all during the wartime. And that's just another little side story. After I did that, he said, now I want to find out what I can do for you. And I said, well, my father was in the United States Army Air Corps in England and France. And he says, I'd like to follow in his footsteps. 2 days later, I was here in Fresno doing my basic training. I was here 2 months doing my basic training, and I had no problem with it. Transferred from Fresno to north of Las Vegas to Indian Springs for my aerial training. I'll have to tell you one little story about that one. I made a mistake by getting into the plane that I was supposed to ride in to shoot the target. And when I sit down, the D-ring on my parachute caught on the side of the plane and opened up that parachute and it billowed up around me. And the poor guy that was the pilot he was a young person, just out of school. And he had told me, he said, I don't want you to embarrass me in any way. He was red as a beet, and so was I. I grabbed that parachute out of that cockpit, went into the hangar and got a new one. I got back out there. But I do want to tell you that pilot put me into position where I was number 10 in the whole squadron. And I got a good chance to go to Las Vegas and spend a little time there with them. And they ate there and all that, and then home again. Transferred from Indian Springs to Amarillo, Texas. And they were going to make a mechanic out of me. And so I went 8 weeks to training in Amarillo, Texas, to ground school there. And they sent me out again to Hill Field in north of Salt Lake City. A fellow by the name of Lee Cool, was a second degree officer, and had trained for 2 years in Tampa, Florida, to train other pilots. And he went into his commanding officer and he says, he says, I'm going to miss this war if you do not let me go overseas. He said, release me. He released him all right, and he happened to be in Hill Field. He pointed me out, and he says, as one of the 8, there were actually 6 enlisted men, and there were 4 officers that we started making our way to back to Tampa, Florida for our aerial gunnery and training as a crew on several B-17s, which weren't really too good a shape, really, basically. And on the way down, there was a fellow by the name of C. Adams, which turned out to be our ball gunner. And I was sitting there freezing in this troop ship train. And here I go again, telling these stories. We decided that we would go into the kitchen area and see if we could help there. Oh, they welcomed us in right away, and it was nice and warm in there. So we stayed there. I took my coat off, tie off, and was working. And we get to Houston, Texas. And when we got to Houston, we decided we'd get out and walk around a little bit. And so we asked the train master that was there, when the train was going to leave, and he says, all you have to do is watch that caboose. If that caboose starts moving, you better run and jump on it. Which was okay with us. So about a few minutes later or so like that, we went back and checked. Sure enough, that caboose was still there. We went out and walked around a little bit and came back, and that caboose was still there. Anyway, we got up there and he says, when are they going to go? And he said, well, they disconnected that caboose. He says, you're watching the caboose that's going to be added to go back the same way it came. And so I looked at the side, and I said, we're going to have to get out on the highway and hitchhike, because we knew we were going to go to Tampa, Florida. And I said, that's the only way I figured we're going to get there. Well, as we was out on the road, a Greyhound bus driver saw us. No hat, no tie, and no coat. He says, what are you 2 boys doing out here in this weather? So about that time, there comes my daughter. That's my daughter, Crystal. Come on in, honey. So anyway, where was I?
You were just about to get picked up by the Greyhound bus driver.
Okay, that Greyhound bus picked us up, took us to Lake Charles, Louisiana Air Base. We went by the train station first, but they wouldn't talk. Loose ships, sink ships, they kept telling. So anyway, the next day, when I got aboard a plane, flew to Tampa, Florida. And when I got to Tampa, Florida, why, we didn't know we didn't know where to go or what. So the pilot and the co-pilot of the plane says, well, we'll take you. They gave me a card. They put an officer's coat on me. They gave me an officer's home and a tie. A home, you know, an officer's coat, hat, and tie. I walked between those two boys, waving a little card that was supposed to be my vindication, but wasn't. And we get inside, because I had no idea how I was going to get on that base. And I didn't even know at that time where it was. But they knew. They had been in and out of there several times. But anyway, we got through the gate, took the hat and tie and the coat off and handed it to them, and said goodbye to them. I appreciated that at least I was aboard inside Drew Field. So I walked back and forth between the barracks until one of the crew members identified me and brought me in. And we did the same thing, waiting for Cy to get in the next day. He had to fly the next day to get in. So we made it there okay. And then we flew several missions out over the Atlantic Ocean and training. And I don't remember exactly how many it was.